Hey guys, David Jelks here, and I just got back. I just got back into town. I'm a little tired from travel and from presenting, but I wanted to actually touch on this real fascinating topic. It's been fascinating. I've been really fascinated by this for years, of course, well, considering my industry. But there's different ways that the body can actually produce and store fat. Different reasons why we carry fat. And it's not always, and the assumption is, of course, the media and is that fat production is because you're at the you're at the lineup at the all you can eat buffet with a lobster bib screaming, "Get the hell out of my way!" And that's kind of the portrayal of what why we carry excess body fat. And yes, excessive calories can, of course, will lead to fat accumulation, and that, of course, that we know that. But there's other things going on. And what I was fascinated by, and very curious, is that if we gain fat for different reasons, different biochemical pathways, different ways that different demands and things that have occurred in our life inside of our body that really force the production of fat, wouldn't we need different methodologies to get rid of the fat? If I was had fat that I accumulated by exceptionally high levels of stress, and we were told that, well, cardiovascular training is really good for fat loss, but if high levels of stress is why I drove the fat on, cardiovascular training may or may not, and probably won't actually give us the effect we're looking for. Sometimes, and I think, again, in my thought process is that if there's a pathway that occurred to make the fat show up, then maybe we need to walk that pathway. We need to shut down that pathway. We need to reverse that mechanism. Does that make sense a little bit? So, so we can get fat by having low thyroid. We can put on body fat by having high levels of insulin. We can get fat by not eating enough food, right? Which is kind of wild, right? We can get fat by not being active enough. We can accumulate body fat by being too stressed out. We can accumulate body fat by toxic exposure, right? So there's a lot of different ways that the body and reasons why the body throws on fat. But it's when we look at high levels of stress, and I just want to read this little piece here. I was looking at it today. I was doing a bit of research, and this is about weight gain and obesity. It says repeated elevation of cortisol can lead to weight gain. So high levels of stress, can lead to weight gain, which we know. We've heard that before. One way is, of course, via visceral fat storage. Cortisol can mobilize triglycerides from storage and relocate them to visceral fat cells, which are those under the muscle deep in the abdomen. Right? So high levels of cortisol can actually start mobilizing fat from one part of your body, right? And drop it into the abdominal region, which is more or less a more dangerous area to hold body fat. Cortisol also stimulates an enzyme process which can actually develop more mature fat cells. So high levels of stress, high levels of cortisol can actually stimulate the body to produce more fat cells through an enzyme pathway, which is what we don't want. Let's see here. We have what else is here? Of course. Now here's the interesting thing. Visceral fat cells, as we talked about before, have more cortisol receptors than subcutaneous fat. And of course, part of the challenge, of course, is we don't want cortisol to continue to be driving fat accumulation in around our guts. But if our stress levels are continuously high and our visceral fat has more receptors for cortisol, then of course, what does that do? Of course, cortisol turns on these enzymes that produce more fat cells. Right? So high levels of stress can mobilize fat from other parts of the body into the abdomen, to the visceral fat region. Visceral fat has more receptor sites for cortisol, and if our cortisol levels remain elevated, then cortisol docks on the cells in the fat cells in the abdomen, and then stimulating the production of more fat cells. You get the message, right? So it's a bit of an ongoing saga and a bit of a challenge, and we can't just run that fat off. We can't starve it off either. High levels of cortisol, of course, affect the appetite and drive the hunger signals, right? So we tend to be a little bit hungrier or a lot hungrier, and because cortisol puts us in a state of fight or flight, which means move, kill it, run away from it, do something, and so our stress levels are really high, and of course we can't mobilize fat as effectively, so our body demands sugar. And when you dump all the sugar out of the muscles and the liver, then of course the brain's going to be told you need to go find some sugar. right? And the other, of course, the other horrible side effect is that a process called gluconeogenesis, when we run out of sugar stores and we're still in this high stress state, the body will actually start converting protein into sugar and dumping it back into the bloodstream. So one, we're losing muscle tissue. Two, if there's elevated levels of sugar, too much elevated levels of sugar in our bloodstream, of course, we take the elevated levels of sugar and convert it to fat. If we're consuming too many carbohydrates because our stress level is high, right, this cortisol thing going on, and of course eating too many carbohydrates, and then it drives our insulin levels up, and again, it's the whole same scenario. So at the end of the day, what all this stuff means really is talking about one of the probably the most beneficial ways, and there's a myriad of other health issues that are connected to high levels of cortisol, but one of the real beneficial ways of actually mitigating this response to cortisol is actually managing stress. And one thing I could recommend, of course, now, walking in nature has been recommended. There's lots of things you can do, but I find in these busy lives, what you can look for is something called binaural beats or binaural software. And binaural just talks about it's various types of software that I've used for meditation. And basically, it's like ambient music. And when you put the headphones on, you may hear Tibetan ringing bowls, which are actually quite beautiful. And they really kind of grab you by the brain. It's actually quite amazing when you listen to them, how the effect of it. But it actually helps take this crazy brain and this high state of stress that you're in, slows your brain waves down to more of an alpha state, to more of a calm state. And if you have it on your iPhone, for example, you can actually plug that in, and 10, 15 minutes a day, a couple times a day, you can go disappear. I used to disappear in my car when I had my facility, and I'd throw my seat back and I'd sit there and I'd meditate for 50 minutes and go back to work. And interrupting that stress cycle multiple times a day is ideal. And again, I'm not sure if you're anything like me, but I can't sit down and just meditate and just shut my mind off because it just goes squirrely, right? As soon as I try not to think, I'm thinking about 82,000 things simultaneously. So because we know high levels of cortisol really have such a powerful effect on fat accumulation, fat storage, and fat cell production, I think one of the most powerful things we can actually start looking at is not about, of course, training is important, which is why we encourage you to be here and be with us. That's not about training harder necessarily all the time. It's training properly. Again, we talk about practicing your movements, practicing the dietary piece, getting the stuff organized. But while you're here, really, we really highly encourage you to start managing stress and looking at various ways that you can actually do that. Again, yoga, walking in nature, painting, lots of things that we can do. But I find for very busy people, sometimes using this meditative software, binaural, right? If you can look it up, and I'll try to find some links for you. But binaural beats, it makes it very easy to have it on your phone, plug it in, and then if you got 10 minutes or 15 minutes, you can do it multiple times a day. And just to interrupt that stress cycle, when you find yourself getting a bit wound up, and then start working on reducing your stress response, take yourself out of the fight or flight pattern, so you can actually kind of slide into to a little bit more of a calmer state, and change the chemistry, change the way your body's reacting. And there's something called the HPA axis, hypothalamus pituitary adrenal gland. It's a stress circuit, and we want to interrupt the stress circuit so we're not dumping cortisol into the system all the time. But we taught our body how to do it. Now we have to teach our body how not to do it. So that's your goal for the next little bit, is let's start managing stress, being aware of it, learning how to give yourself a timeout. And again, if you can, multiple times a day, even if it's 5 minutes, whatever you can afford, break the cycle that you're in, get up and move around. Again, if you locate that binaural technology, or even just calming music that really resonates with you, and you can kind of settle into it, just to slow everything down, to take you out of that stress zone, I think you'll find not only will fat loss become easier in time, but of course your whole outlook on life will change. And so it's just there's other aspects we'll look at, but I think this is a very powerful one, and it's a really great place to start. Okay, you guys have a wonderful one, and I'll talk to you soon.